Story title: He fired every maid, but the last one hid a secret that shattered his world. Before Lagos fully stirred, before the impatient car horns filled the streets, before the smoke of roasted corn drifted into the morning air, Ruth was already awake. Her hands, soaked in cold soapy water, scrubbed uniforms that were not her own. The yard smelled of wet dust and detergent. Somewhere outside, a newspaper vendor shouted the day's headlines. Stories of wealth, politics, power. None of it belonged to her world. Her fingers trembled, not only from the cold but from exhaustion. She had been awake since 4 a.m., carrying the weight of unpaid debts, her mother's medicine, and her younger brother's school fees. Every slap of cloth against stone was a reminder of what life demanded of her. And yet, when she straightened her back and looked up, her eyes caught the Lagos skyline, towers of glass rising into the pale dawn. For a brief moment, they seemed like another universe, unreachable. Inside one of those towers lived Julian, son of real estate billionaire Richard Cole. Julian had everything money could buy, yet his soul seemed restless. Rumors in the mansion said he rejected every maid hired for him. Too clumsy, too slow, too nosy. No one lasted more than a week. Until Ruth walked through those gates. She did not enter like others. She carried her worn sandals in her hand, so they wouldn't squeak on the marble tiles. Her head was bowed, but her presence was steady. Julian looked up and, for the first time, paused. Something about her silence unsettled him. He could have dismissed her, but he didn't. He kept her. And Ruth did not know yet that behind his silence, behind his family's empire, lay secrets that would one day collide with her own. Ruth's life was never easy. She grew up in Ajigunle, in a house where the zinc roof leaked with every rainfall. The kerosene lamp coughed smoke into their small room. Her father, once a bus driver, never returned one night. A crash on the expressway ended his story. Ruth was only 12 when responsibility crushed her. Her mother, Mary, became both mother and father. She sold bean cakes by the roadside, her hands blistered from hot oil. Every evening, no matter how tired, she hummed the same hymn while cleaning her son's torn school bag. Ruth would watch, listening. Those cracked notes were her first lesson in survival. Even in dust, we must rise. But poverty was cruel. Ruth often sat by the cracked wall at night, whispering to her absent father, "I won't drown, I'll rise." Her brother laughed with chalk-stained hands, dreaming of one day teaching children. Hope flickered like a candle in the wind. One Saturday evening, Ruth was sweeping the church pews for a small wage. The building smelled of wax and old wood. She wore her faded dress. She didn't know the tall young man in a crisp, white shirt was Julian. He was sitting at the piano, pressing broken keys. The sound was fragile, almost searching. She stopped, broom in hand. He looked up. Their eyes met briefly. She dropped her gaze. No words, but something lingered. The following week, when Ruth entered the Cole mansion, she saw him again. The same boy from the piano, but here he was the billionaire's son. When Julian dismissed the others but chose to keep her, Ruth understood. He remembered too. At first, their exchanges were brief. A glass of water placed on his desk. A faint smile when she polished the piano and saw his scribbled notes. One evening, he asked softly, "You know music?" Ruth shook her head. "I only know songs my mother hums." "Then you already know more than me," Julian whispered. Conversations grew. He asked why she never asked for favors, why she never stared at his cars. She replied simply, "Because those things are not mine to carry." Her honesty disarmed him. Slowly, the walls fell. He left books on the counter, knowing she'd open them. She hummed while sweeping. He quietly joined with the piano. But Mama Grace, the cook, saw the closeness. One evening she touched Ruth's arm. "Child," she said softly, "be careful. Gold that shines too bright can burn your hand." Ruth forced a smile, but her chest tightened. She wanted to believe Julian's kindness was real. But in Lagos, love between the powerful and powerless never came without scars. Then came the dinner. Fairy lights in the garden, soft jazz playing. Julian looked at her across the table. "You don't see me as my father's son," he said. "You see me." Ruth's eyes softened. "Because I met you in a church, not a boardroom." For a moment, hope blossomed. But that night, as Ruth carried dishes through the corridor, she heard voices in his study. Julian's laughter. Not the one she knew. Louder, careless. "So, you really kept one of the maids," a friend mocked. "Your taste for strays never ends." And Julian's voice followed, sharp as a blade. "Relax. She's nothing. Just a distraction. She doesn't matter." The tray slipped. Plates shattered. Her body froze. Laughter continued inside, slicing through her. She stumbled outside. The city lights blurred like her tears. The man she thought saw her had only seen a shadow. For days, Ruth vanished. But she wasn't broken. Not anymore. She had seen too much in the Cole mansion. Documents left carelessly, conversations overheard. She confided in Toby, her childhood friend studying law. Together, they pieced corruption, evictions hidden behind projects, stolen contracts. Julian's father was ruthless, but not untouchable. Toby looked at Ruth one night and said, "If you bring this out, they'll come for you." Ruth's voice was steady. "I've lived with nothing. What more can they take?" The boardroom meeting was meant to be a triumph for Richard Cole. Investors sat polished and eager. Julian smirked beside his father. No one expected Ruth to walk in. She entered quietly, Toby at her side, journalists waiting. Documents spread across the table. Photographs, contracts, testimonies. Cameras clicked. "Who let her in?" Richard roared. Ruth met his gaze calmly. "Truth doesn't need permission." Julian's face drained. He tried to speak. "Ruth, But she silenced him with one look. "You thought I was nothing. But nothing doesn't stay silent forever." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled. Investors whispered. The empire cracked under her steady hand. When she left the room, she did not run. She walked with her head unbowed. Lagos buzzed with scandal. Richard Cole faced investigation. Investors fled. The mansion gates closed heavy with shame. Julian wandered restless, searching for Ruth, but she no longer waited. Meanwhile, Ruth's life turned quietly. She and Toby started a small legal aid fund for families thrown out by ruthless landlords. She visited mothers like her own, children like her brother. She had little, but she had dignity. One rainy evening, Toby brought her tea. "You've changed everything," he said. Ruth smiled faintly. "No, I only chose not to be silent." He looked at her with gentle eyes. No gold watch, no mansion, just presence. For the first time, Ruth realized that true value wasn't in glass towers. It was in hands that held you without demanding payment. Months later, Ruth took Toby to her mother. The small room smelled of bean cakes. Mary's frail hands shook as she welcomed him. "Is this the one?" she asked with a smile. Ruth laughed softly. "Yes, Mama." They shared a meal under the glow of a small lantern. No fairy lights, no marble halls. Just family, laughter, and peace. Julian? He stood outside once, unseen, watching from a distance. His eyes heavy with regret. But he turned back alone. Wealth could not buy back the one he mocked. That night, Ruth leaned into her mother's hum. She had walked through betrayal, carried shame, stood against power, and survived. The city roared outside, but inside their little room, peace lived.